So, the translations are out for My Hero Academia manga chapter 424, and let's just say that My Hero Academia isn't ending anytime soon. If by soon you mean within the next chapter, because a lot went down in this chapter. Time skip to the future. More information about Bakugo and Deku, and whether or not Deku actually is quirkless. All that and more will be discussed in this video, in this review, and we're going to get into it right now. Hey guys, how's it going? It is your boy, Monkman Drew, and I'm here to give my review for My Hero Academia manga chapter 424, titled Epilogue. And just as a prerequisite for this, and the title of this chapter comes more towards the end of the chapter, and it also ties into Horikoshi's author's comments about how there's more to come and that the story isn't over and that they need to really tackle everything that's going to be going on within the Hero Society. And that idea is a little bit more echoed within this chapter because the war is over, but the story is not. This chapter is going to be the start and the prerequisite for what's to come when it comes to not just the final volume of My Hero Academia, but the most likely final arc and final story beats. There's a fair amount that we need to talk about, a few cameos, a few characterizations, and a few realizations that may or may not rub you, the audience, the wrong way. So let's just dive right into the review and really talk about what's going on in this chapter. And to start off, the chapter actually starts off with Meryl. You know, the very attractive black news reporter. Apparently, we get the confirmation that she is in Washington State, you know, where Seattle is, up in the northwestern area of the United States. Yes, I know geography. And how she pretty much is apologizing for the fact that, oh wow, sorry for what I said the last time, just ignore that. Yeah, the weather's gonna be great, everything is just sunshine all across the country. Also, there's this very strong wind that has been blowing for a few days ever since the war ended, but you know, just ignore that. Everything is going to be pretty much what she says, and the implication is that the war is over, everything is going back to normal, and that while the world is changing, that she will continue to be the forecastist, or to be the weather woman. And this is where we get a little bit more interesting as we dive a little bit more into what actually happened at the end of the war. So we actually jump a week into the future where we get the confirmation that all of the heroes that the US president sent over to Japan were not necessarily to fight against the villains, but to more or less help rebuild society or rebuild Japan. Because if any country was hit the most by villain destruction, it was Japan, not only because there were several prison breaks, but literally Tomura Shigaraki destroyed a large swath of a large city right next to Fuji, and even parts of Fuji itself. So what's cool about this scene is that we get to see characters such as Cementos, as well as, if I remember correctly, one of the teachers in the support course, I forgot his name, but he has more or less the digging quirk, as well as some other foreign heroes such as Salam, as well as Big Red Dot and another American hero with lightning on him, and they're all in Japan. And we get pretty much the narrator, we don't know if it's Deku, pretty much telling them how construction is going well, heroes from the US and around the world are giving aid to Japan, and that a lot of people are doing well, a lot of people are getting their homes back. And we get a few cameos with Big Red Dot, like I said, saying that even though they couldn't fight with the other heroes, that they're going to help support Japan. As well as we get to see a new hero who has a quirk that's able to project 3D images, as we see that one of the construction workers may actually be Uraraka's father. So we're getting a lot of cameos from characters working within the realm of what we saw within the world of My Hero Academia prior. We see even Tokage helping out with the construction, and how they bring up this idea that the construction that they are doing right now is something that before quirks existed would have taken 10 years to complete at minimum, but most likely than not, they are trying to construct it within a timely manner, which makes sense with characters like Cementos, who can literally make buildings and destroy buildings just in an instant. So it's cool that we get to see some of these characters working together to try and better Japan, as we even get some kids that we saw during the first war. One of the kids was trapped under some rubble, and the little sister tried to get her younger brother out, and they were saved by Suyu as well as Froppy. They are also here. But we also get to see the Skycrawler Koichi cameo in this chapter, and let me just say this. Koichi, you are still wanted for all of the crimes that you committed in Japan while you were a villain. We are taking you in right now. But with jokes aside, this pretty much canonizes vigilantes into the world of My Hero Academia, which I'm accepting of. There's still some issues when it comes to All Might that I'm very iffy about being in the manga canon, but overall, this is just really showing Horikoshi at his Horikoshiest, bringing references and callbacks to the forefront and just really having fun with it, as we see a big old wide shot of Japan, Fuji, all the destruction that Tomura Shigaraki pretty much performed, as we get just more narration of someone saying with all the quirk combinations that everything is going to go back to the way it was. But this is juxtaposed with one of the doctors at Central Hospital telling Bakugo that there's no way that he'll be going back to the way that it was. And this is where we're cutting over to the more emotional part of the chapter. The part of the chapter where we focus away from, oh yeah, society is getting better, to look at how the characters are dealing with the consequences of the war. And one of the consequences of the war is that Bakugo's right arm is heavily mangled, which makes sense because that is also the arm of Deku, who has constantly had that arm mangled. Really just showing the potential parallels, mirror foils that Bakugo and Deku have. And even the Yoshi doctor literally saying that he has no idea how Bakugo was able to perform the feats that he did in the war, but that if he wants to continue to be a hero, he may have to get rid of the arm, very much like what Mirko did. And if not, he may have to go to rehab, which is not a guarantee that he'll be able to recover with the use of his arm. And provided with all this information, Bakugo just says, nah, I'm good. My quirk comes from the sweat in the palm of my hands, and that I'm going to be doing a whole bunch of hard training to get my body back in shape. So bring it on, rehab. But unfortunately, he can't go full throttle because of the fact that he had his entire body pretty much put together by Edshot, as you get a little bit of confirmation that what Edshot basically did was perform CPR on Bakugo, which tracks. He wasn't like trying to like fix his heart, but he did sew it up and tried to keep it pumping. Pretty much the idea of CPR, getting the heart pumping again. But even after all of this, you have Bakugo who's just not content with what the doctor says. Cutting over from what Bakugo is saying, we'll get a little bit more of him later. We actually begin to cut over to a scene where we get to see All Might and Deku in the same room, having a really fun conversation about, oh my gosh, I am in the same hospital as All Might. As All Might's like, yeah, it was probably Tsukachi's idea to keep us together because there's not that many rooms. Also, you know, safety purposes and whatnot. As we just have Deku having a conversation with All Might and pretty much reflecting on what happened last chapter, what happened between himself and Tomura Shigaraki, or should I say Tenko, in that final clash. And how he says that his arms are feeling better, but that in the end, he couldn't save Tenko's life. And how he reflects upon how he was able to get rid of the hatred, and how even though he failed to save Tenko's life, he thought that he could have done more, that he was able to reach inside to talk to Tenko, and that he was able to get rid of the hatred, yet Tenko still wanted to be a villain until the very end. And how he really doesn't think that he actually saved Tenko, but All Might brings up an idea that I've had about why Deku actually saved Tenko, why he actually saved Tomura, which is that he asked what the face of Tomura looked like when he died. And the confirmation was that Tomura had a smile on his face, and the last words that he said is that, so you better do your best, in response to what Deku was saying about how Tomura actually destroyed it, and how he's most likely going to change the world for the better. And then this is punctuated by the idea that because he wasn't crying, that his heart was saved, and that this is what One for All was meant to do, and that passing it on to him means that he reached him, and that he was able to feel the emotions and the reasoning why he wanted to save him in that moment. as we have the image of all the vestiges of One for All smiling. And I like this because we didn't necessarily need, in my opinion, a deep conversation between Tomura and Deku. The main reason and the main conflict is that Tomura thinks that he can't be saved and Deku wanted to save him. And while Tomura still wanted to be a villain in the end, what happened was that his heart was saved. The sadness and the pain that was inside of him was eventually thrown away. And this ties into an idea when it comes to saving people. While yes, Deku did fail to save the physical body of Tomura, he saved Tomura or Tenko's heart. Which is very important because there's a tie between Tomura Tenko as well as Eri. Because even though they physically were able to save Eri, they were not able to save her mentally, emotionally. They weren't able to save her heart at that moment. It was only afterwards where she got to know all of the students of Class 1A and seeing Jiro and learning how to smile for the first time when she was finally saved, or at least her heart was saved. And this is kind of the idea why I do think that Tomura's end is fitting, because while he still wanted to be a villain in the end, his version of villainy is different from the perception of Deku's idea of villainy. To the same extent where what the idea of heroism and being the greatest hero is also different from what we as the audience viewed it versus characters within the story. Being the greatest hero didn't mean that you were number one, and being a villain doesn't mean that you weren't saved. And the fact that it ends with Tomura telling Deku to do his best really just emphasizes the idea that even in the end, whether or not you agree that Tomura should be dead, that he somewhat was saved by the fact that he repeated the exact same words that literally all the other heroes told to Deku to do his best, showing to the very end, at the very least for the first time, that he supported Deku's decision and most likely his ideals of heroism. So this may still rub people the wrong way, but to me, this makes the scene from the last chapter a little bit better and really contextualizes and re-understands what I was actually arguing for the last chapter when it comes to Deku saving Tomura Tenko in this moment. But that's not even the half of it, because we also get the reveal and the confirmation that Deku at this moment is quirkless, and that he only have embers of One for All left inside of him. And it's at this moment that Bakugo chimes in, here's what Deku is saying, and the most emotion that we've seen out of Bakugo happens in these next few moments. Because Bakugo was talking about how he's going to still be a hero and that he needs to work on his arm and keep up with Deku, and pretty much how you were viewing it, he was viewing Deku as his rival and he wanted to keep up that rivalry to the very end. But with the idea that he only has flames inside of him, and we see that Bakugo more or less breaks down completely, but Deku isn't necessarily okay as well. While yes, Deku is quirkless, and in my opinion, just because he's quirkless, he can't be a hero, and it's not just Bakugo. Deku is also breaking down to a certain extent. While I do think that what Deku says will most likely change towards the end of the series, he does bring up the idea that because he is quirkless, he's fine with the state that he's in, and that he was happy that he was able to live out his dream for the short amount of time. And how while he's trying to comfort Bakugo in this moment, Bakugo begins to cry, like I said, because he realized that he won't be able to keep up that idea of being a rival to Deku, and even says as much to him. And even in this moment, you have Deku who's trying to comfort Bakugo in this moment, but you can also see the little bit of pain in his voice as he talks about like, no, you shouldn't cry. Like, yeah, I still got the embers, but my body is messed up and my mental state is a bit off. You can tell that he is not okay, as we see Bakugo isn't okay, because their speech patterns are very similar in this moment. And while I do think that Deku does believe in this somewhat, he also is in a state of disbelief because he can no longer be the hero that he thinks that he can be. But most likely towards the end of the story, he's going to realize that, no, I can still be a hero even if I'm quirkless. But really what sets this moment into high gear of emotional peak is what All Might says in this moment. He confirms once again to Midoriya that he was the greatest hero when he ran up to try and save Bakugo as a quirkless individual. And that idea of heroism and what made him the greatest hero in the eyes of All Might also made him the greatest hero in the eyes of the entire world. And that the same can be said about Bakugo and how they've all changed, and that by giving him the opportunity to say this to both of them, that Bakugo has also been the greatest hero. And that this is just the emotional high that we've all needed, because what defines the greatest hero is not necessarily the strength or the power that you have, but what you mean to the other characters and how they interpret the idea of greatest hero. And in the case of Bakugo and Deku, it's just being there and living up to the ideals instilled inside of them by All Might, and how this causes them to most likely smile and to accept their fate as it is right now and to be able to move forward. However, the final pages of the chapter has Deku monologuing in the future, talking about as a kid, he thought that as soon as the war ended, peace was immediate, but that they still need to actually work harder to actually achieve the bright future that they've all wanted. As we got in a few panels of Uraraka looking solemnly outside the window, holding her abdomen, the wound where Toga struck her. So that's something that also needs to be resolved. As we also see apparently scales on a tray, which could be the confirmation that Spinner could be dead or is going through a form of surgery to remove that hardened scales from him. Or potentially these could be from Dabi, as we see Shoto from behind in a white area, not seeing his expression, not knowing the fate of the Todoroki family, something else that needs to be resolved. And how the chapter ends with, once again, the title being Epilogue, as we see Ida, Kaminari, as well as Deku with a new hairstyle heading towards UA to potentially continue their schooling. And this is very interesting because we see that Deku is very much scarred on the right side of his face. And to be honest, he has a very decent looking haircut that me personally, I don't hate it, but has thrown the entire fandom once again in a tizzy with whether or not you like it or hate it, or you're just straight out disgusted by it. But me personally, I'm fine with it. I don't hate it, and I think it's okay. Better hairstyle in my opinion than Naruto and Ichigo, but hey, to each their own. But yeah, that's the end of this chapter. And let me just say that I really did enjoy this being the start of the epilogue. While the ending is not necessarily like perfectly written, I think this is a perfect end for My Hero Academia when it comes to not just the war aspect, but the series as a whole. Because rarely in shonen manga do you have a actual ending being done as an epilogue. Typically you have a chapter of 2 after the big monumental battle as we skip towards the end of everything being resolved, and we rarely get to see how we get from point A to point B. But Horikoshi said in his comments and is showing in this chapter that we're going to get the full experience, seeing how the bright future will be formed before we actually jump into that bright future. And it's all going to start at UA. So potentially we're going to be seeing Deku interacting with the characters, interacting with his classmates, showing how his battle with Tomura affected him, affected the other students, and beginning to change the perspectives of the people. And we'll most likely, if not within the next chapter, within the next volume, because at the very minimum, this epilogue is going to be 5 to 15 chapters minimum, specifically because the start of the actual epilogue is around chapter 2 of a volume. So volumes typically range from 10 to 13 pages. So we have around 5 if the last chapter is a very long chapter count, page count, or we're going to have a volume that has maybe the upwards of 12 to 13 chapters in it, 2 of them down, so maybe 9 to 10 chapters left. But yeah, overall, really enjoyed the chapter, really enjoyed them beginning to explore the reconstruction of Hero Society in Japan, really did enjoy the interactions that we saw with Bakugo and seeing his character development and growth, as well as getting to see a little bit more of Deku and getting to see something that we really don't see, him contemplating on the last words about how he sort of failed but actually still succeeded in the end, and really showing the connection that Bakugo and Deku have when it comes to All Might, and really just foreshadowing on what's to come in the future. But yeah, that's all I really have to say for the chapter. Let me ask you, did you like the chapter? What did you think of the chapter? And what do you think of Deku's hair? And if you want to see more content like this, subscribe to my YouTube channel if you want to see more of it, and do all that cool jazz, and hopefully I'll be able to catch you in my next video. Goodbye!